Hey, listeners, this is sort of a Halloween special. It's a long story, so I've decided to split it up into multiple parts. I actually haven't thought about how the rest of the story will go, so that will be a surprise in itself. So stay tuned. I'm not sure I will finish all the parts by Halloween, since I'm quite busy with family life and a new job, so please forgive me if I don't finish the story by Halloween. Anyway, as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Enjoy The Haunting of Plainsview Elementary, Part 1. It was a cloudy and cool mid-October day as Amy approached the playground at the back of the Plainsview Elementary School. She stopped when she spotted someone sitting on one of the swings. The playground was where she went to get away from everyone, and it was her favorite spot. She was curious who the person was, so she crept quietly around the trees and bushes. Amy was afraid of alerting them, so she was careful not to get too close. With the school's dark history, there was no telling who or what she'd run into. She previously had several terrifying encounters with some odd beings. No doubt most of them were ghosts haunting the school premises, Amy thought. Some of them were dressed like they were from other time periods. She couldn't tell which ones, but she had seen enough photos from books and movies to tell they were oddly dressed. The ones who still looked normal were pale and sickly. Others were twisted or mangled beyond imagination. Then there were the creatures from some hellish nightmare. Amy had been around long enough to know which parts of the school she could safely walk through, and which ones to avoid, as some of the entities were dangerous, especially the creatures. The phenomenon was something Amy couldn't explain, but she seemed to be the only one that could see the beings as far as she knew. The others could hear them sometimes, but she hadn't met anyone else with the ability to see them. Whatever the case, all the students knew there was something off about the school. A dense and dark energy surrounded the atmosphere. Amy felt it right away on the first day she attended Plainsview. It made her nauseous. She had a headache and stomachache accompanied by feverish symptoms. Amy's only relief was getting outside where the symptoms still existed, but weren't as strong. Over time, her body was able to build a tolerance for them. From a crouched position 20 feet away, Amy could see the side of the person on the swing. It was a skinny boy with a backpack on. The boy also had on a pair of glasses. He looked about her age, maybe younger. The boy looked lost in thought. Looking at him reminded Amy of herself. Just then, an amusing idea popped in her mind, producing a mischievous smile across her face. She quickly made her way behind him from the bushes, then tiptoed cautiously to the boy. Amy extended her arms to shove him off the swing when she heard someone. "Hey, you there!" a man's voice shouted. Awakened from his trance, the boy's head shot up at once, his face filled with shock and surprise. Behind the fence was a stocky man in a mechanic's jumpsuit. It had a white name tag with red letters that read Manny. "You gotta go back to class, kid. I know it's not exciting like Minecraft or Roblox, but rules are rules," Manny said. The boy stared at Manny for a second, then hopped off the swing and made his way toward the gate. Amy peeked from behind a tree as Manny escorted the boy back to class. She breathed a sigh of relief. That was a close call, she thought. There was something about the boy that drew her to him. Amy had to find out who he was. A door with a narrow window opened. Beside it hung a plate with the number 39. In walked the boy and Manny behind him. A middle-aged woman with a pair of glasses was going over a geography lesson, but paused as the boy and Manny stopped by her desk. The boy stared at the floor, avoiding the gaze of his classmates. "Mrs. Williams, I found this boy at the playground. He never told me his name, so I just followed him here. I figured you know him," Manny said. "Thank you, Mr. Manny. He's one of mine. His name is Chow, though he doesn't talk much. You may leave him with me. Chow, proceed to your seat. I will have a word with you after class," Mrs. Williams said. Manny bid goodbye to the teacher and left, while Chow made his way to his seat. His desk was the second seat from the last on his row. Behind him sat Brock, who was the biggest fifth grader he'd ever seen. He was thick and tall. Brock had the makings of a future athlete. He glared intensely at Chow. Chow sensed it, but ignored him like he did the other kids. He set his backpack on his desk and took his seat. Mrs. Williams continued her lesson, talking about the different continents of the world and major bodies of water surrounding them. "Missed ya," Brock whispered as he kicked Chow's desk from behind. The other kids within earshot snickered. Not 5 minutes had gone by when Brock started taunting him with racial slurs and hitting him with spitballs. Chow continued ignoring him. After he didn't get a reaction, he jabbed Chow's back with the sharp end of a pencil. Chow felt the sudden jolt of pain in his back, and he whipped around to confront his tormentor, his brows furrowing in a menacing death stare, his fists clenched so tightly he began to shake. The hate and anger boiled intensely from within the boy as his breath quickened. Unfazed by the smaller Chow, Brock grinned obnoxiously, then leaned over and whispered into Chow's ear, "What you gonna do, boy?" As much as he wanted to strangle the big oaf, he couldn't muster enough courage to stand up to him. So instead of directing his anger towards Brock, he pointed it at himself. He hated how helpless he was. If only he were bigger, stronger, and tougher, Brock wouldn't mess with him, he thought. Chow turned back to the front of the class and buried his face in his backpack laid on top of the desk as he sobbed quietly in humiliation. "Yeah, that's what I thought," said Brock. Chow was new to Plainsview. His family had recently moved into town after his dad got a job at a warehouse nearby. Throughout his childhood, Chow had always been quiet, awkward, and shy, so it was difficult for him to make new friends. Now it was even worse, since less than 1% of the students were Asian. He stuck out like a sore thumb. Ever since the first day of class, Brock and his goons picked on Chow. The other kids stayed quiet or steered clear of them since they didn't want to be targeted. If anything, Chow involuntarily became a much-needed abatement for the other victims of Brock's wrath. Such was life for Chow every day since his start at Plainsview. However, there were other things much more terrifying than a mere bully. One day when Chow was using the bathroom, he felt a cold draft as someone came in from behind him. The odd part was the cold seemed to linger in the air. He shuddered at once, for it was an all too familiar feeling. A sense of dread came over him. Suddenly, there came a dull thud a few feet from him, then another, and another. Chow stood in front of the urinal, not being able to finish fast enough as the thudding continued. He zipped up his pants when he finally finished peeing. He then proceeded toward the door, not even bothering to wash his hands. But something drew his eyes toward the far wall across from the door where the last stall was. There, standing with his back to Chow, was a pudgy man in a loosely fitted hospital gown, with his butt showing. His skin was a pale gray, and he had dark hair. There was blood on the brick wall where the man slammed his head against over and over again. Chow sprinted out the door. He didn't stop running until he turned the corner to where his classroom was. He leaned against the wall to catch his breath, then he peeked behind him to see if he was being followed. Chow breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that the coast was clear. Ever since then, he avoided going to the bathroom if he could. Whenever he had to go, Chow went to the one on the other side of the school. He hated going places in between classes because he never knew what he was going to encounter. Occasionally, he'd see people walking or running through walls or doors and disappearing. During a trip to another classroom to watch a movie one time, Chow and his class were on the lower level when he witnessed a woman plunge onto the floor from one of the staircases high above them. There was a loud slapping sound when the woman hit the floor. Startled, Chow jumped back, plowing into some of the students like a bowling ball. "Hey!" a boy shouted. "What gives?" a girl exclaimed. The woman landed on her face with her neck twisted, her one good eye staring straight at Chow as blood pooled under her. Like the man from the bathroom, she was also in a hospital gown. She got up after a few moments and made her way toward Chow. The front of her gown was soaked in blood and it streaked onto the floor, creating a messy trail behind her. Half of her face was shattered and bloodied. One of the eyeballs hung loosely to her broken socket. Her mouth hung wide open, slack-jawed, blood streaming from it and onto the already blood-drenched gown. She stumbled awkwardly toward Chow, murmuring something he couldn't understand and didn't want to understand. She reached for him, and he gulped hard as he crawled backwards on his behind. Mrs. Williams and the other kids could see his terrified face, but couldn't understand why Chow was acting so strange. "Chow, what's the matter? Are you okay?" Mrs. Williams asked as she approached him. The boy's eyes were fixed on something behind her, She followed them to see what had frightened the boy, but saw nothing suspicious. How could they not see the horror standing next to them, he thought. Chow tried to get up and run, but he couldn't find his legs, so he continued crawling backwards as fast as he could. Chow thrusted himself hard into the brick wall behind him and passed out from the impact. Among the students that day was Amy. She observed the event from a distance as more teachers and staff members showed up to attend to the boy. All the kids hung around to see what had occurred, but were hurried along by the adults. The fallen woman had vanished by then. Amy recalled the first time she'd seen her. The woman was just as horrifying at that moment as the first time Amy saw her. Amy followed the winding staircase to investigate the fall once, and discovered the woman leapt to her death from the 9th floor. Amy wondered if the woman was being punished for taking a shortcut through life by continuing to live that awful day over and over. The thought made Amy cringe. If so, was this what people meant when they mentioned hell on earth? Maybe hell wasn't necessarily a place bad people go, but what they did on earth after they died. Whatever the case, it wasn't something Amy wanted to be a part of. On a positive note, she finally found someone who could also see the undead beings. She was no longer the crazy one, and was no longer alone. Chow's mother, Yer, sat in the waiting room as she waited anxiously for an update from the doctor. Chow was their only living child. She didn't know what she'd do if something were to happen to him. Yer and her husband, Nai, had been trying to have kids for over 10 years. But after many heartaches, they were finally blessed with their miracle child. Chow had gotten hurt before, but has never been hospitalized. His previous injuries have always been bumps, bruises, scratches, and more severely, even burns and bite marks. For the most part, the couple always assumed they were self-inflicted accidents from play like most children. But the strangest thing was Chow had never been an active baby. He rarely ran around or climbed furniture. Despite that, he still wound up with injuries they couldn't explain, like the burns or bite marks in places he couldn't reach by himself. The couple would discover them randomly from time to time when bathing or changing him. Then there were the night terrors. Chow would get them constantly every night. It wasn't until he was 5 that they calmed down a bit, but by then he started to sleepwalk. Sometimes he'd disappear, and his parents would find him hiding in a closet, under the bed, or roaming around in the backyard. The scariest experience was when Chow was 7. Yer found her son in the backyard, staring into the sky with only the whites of his eyes showing. He was motionless for a few minutes. Then when he came to, it was as if nothing happened. They'd ask him about his experiences, but he'd never say much. It was then that she suspected Chow was truly different from other kids. She and Nai finally sought a shaman to look into all the occurrences surrounding Chow. "Your son is very gifted, much more so than any shaman I've ever known," said the shaman. Then he gave them a relic in the form of a bracelet. It was constructed of red wooden beads. Each one of the beads had a foreign inscription carved on it. The shaman added, "This will protect Chow from demons and evil spirits, but it will also suppress his powers to keep him safe from himself. He is curious and has begun experimenting with his abilities." Regardless of all the abnormalities surrounding their son, they loved him unconditionally and would go to great lengths to protect him. None of their friends or relatives knew about the incidents with Chow except the shaman. The couple tried their best to provide him with a normal life, or at least as normal as possible. "Yer, I came as fast as I could," said a man. The woman looked up. It was Nai. He had a look of concern and was winded. She got out of the chair to embrace him, and they held each other tightly. Just then the doctor walked into the waiting room, and they focused their attention on him. The doctor greeted them with handshakes. "I just wanted to let you know that your son bumped his head pretty good, causing him to black out. There's a knot and a little bleeding. He'll have a headache for a few days, but other than that, he's going to be fine. Chow is awake now if you would like to see him," the doctor said. This concludes part 1 of The Haunting of Plainsview Elementary School. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more to come. Also, let me know what stories you'd like to listen to in the comments. This channel isn't genre specific, so I'd like to hear some responses from y'all, and as always, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time.